Greetings from the Dark Continent, Conscious Caracal here, or Adams van Sail, and today I'm joined by a recovering journalist called Chris Waldburger, and we're going to be discussing a topic that's very interesting and a topic that I think is very pertinent, and that topic is the topic of nation building, specifically now in the wake of what we saw happen in Afghanistan, but also looking at what's happening around us here in South Africa. And I think one of the more important themes here that needs to be unpacked is definitely this idea that a nation can be built. That's the question that needs to be asked. So welcome on the show, Chris.
Thanks very much for having me, Ernst.
So let's start off just with a simple question. How did you set out on this road of going from being a journalist, getting to this point where you're now writing opinion pieces, or rather Substack pieces on the liberal imperialism and what's wrong in the world, going against everything that you hear from the media today?
Written freelance for over a decade now, 15 years, but I've never really made my primary living from it, and I think that makes a big difference, because then you're not, your salary doesn't depend on you on having the right views, and you're not in these newsrooms and in this environment where you are getting shaped ideologically, and especially in the sense that journalists are shaped implicitly and invisibly. They think the liberal view is some kind of neutral, disenchanted, secular view of the world, when in fact it's very much a violent imposition of something that is novel in history. And I think one of the reasons why people generally break with liberalism is if you have any kind of religious faith, any kind of traditionalism, then you are almost graced with not being a child of your time and not being kind of bound by the zeitgeist of your era, the dominant kind of narrative and frame in which the world is viewed.
No, that sounds about right. Now, let's start off with that question that I asked in the beginning. Can a nation be built? What are your thoughts on this phenomenon of nation building that's so contemporary, but yet so popular in our times?
Yeah, and I think it comes back to liberalism. This idea that you can build a nation, you just need a constitution, and you can chuck some elections together, and suddenly you'll have some kind of rational freedom. You'll be liberated from all the natural limits of human life, like family, clan, language, religion, culture, and I mean, I almost think to theoretical and philosophical, but if you just look at Afghanistan, I mean, everything is summed up by a few simple news stories that, they painted a mural of George Floyd in Afghanistan, the American forces. I mean, what on earth is that? Imagine being an Afghanistani, and now you have these occupiers who claim to be liberating you, and they paint a mural, like a kind of almost religious image of this criminal who was randomly killed by one of their own policemen, although he probably died of an overdose, actually. And now you've got that sitting in your country, probably next to the Burger King that the Americans built. And on top of that, you have the Americans bribing warlords with Viagra so they can carry on their pedophilia activities. And that is nation building. That is liberating Afghanistan from the Taliban. That's what America has done, and we see it all the way back to Napoleon. You try to impose these rational states, these constitutional states, and it's just not how human beings work. You can go back to the common sense of Aristotle. You have family, you have community, then you have the state, and they all depend on each other. And actually, their purpose is to inculcate virtue and excellence and beauty, and it needs to happen within those human realms. And what these liberals are doing is they believe they have grasped some kind of universal truth that democracy is definitely the best regime, and it's just not true. And we're seeing that now with the news last night of Biden basically mandating all of America to be vaccinated for a disease that kills less than 0.5% or something like that. And if you're not obese, and mandating that everybody has it, when the science clearly shows that if you've had it before, you're better protected than the vaccine. And the latest studies reckon that 80% of America has had it already. So it's not scientific. It's not rational. It is just a rage against God and against natural humanity. And so it can't build a human nation. It can just build a regime. And to go back to Aristotle, democracy can be a kind of tyranny. It's that's why Aristotle didn't actually believe in democracy.
And the interesting thing here that I saw as well is that this, I said it's a very contemporary idea, but we saw this almost in the 1990s, a little bit in the 1980s and early 2000s. This idea, this American and liberal idea that if you just give a country capitalism and democracy, then it's a recipe for success. It's called like this golden recipe, the golden two. And pretty much what you said there as well, the mural next to probably the Burger King, you just open them up to the world and you give them McDonald's and you give them all these nice consumer products, and then you give them a nice proper liberal democracy, and then alongside that you give them this new identity away with. It's like that that quote from that one Mozambican leader, I always forget his name, Samora Machel, I think. He said, for the nation to prosper, the tribe must die. And that's pretty much the mantra of this globalist philosophy, is that tribes must die, cultures must be extinguished, and we all just need to be meshed together in this gray goo of individualism. And everyone's an individual, and your identity is based on what TV show is your favorite and what band poster you have against your wall. That's enough to give yourself a fulfilling life. And now we're seeing the end of that lie, or that fantasy of that nations can be built in this way. And if you actually read some of Samuel Huntington's earlier writings in the 90s, where he actually hit the nail on the head, and it's almost as if you're reading something that was written in contemporary times, where he writes about the everywhere where the West has tried to westernize other countries, as soon as those countries get a chance, they try to remove all these westernized ideas and values again from their society. It's not something that stays organically. Now, another country that also is a victim of this nation-building utopianism is South Africa. Now, you mentioned Afghanistan. Afghanistan is nation-building by military occupation. And as soon as the military leaves, it just reverts back to what it was, almost like an old building in nature. If you don't maintain it, the weeds in nature take it over again. But South Africa is nation building by big government and by a new state identity, the Rainbow Nation. You're proudly South African. Your identity is South African. And it's a very interesting phenomenon. Now, what are your thoughts on how nation building has transpired in South Africa specifically?
I think if you go back to when the negotiations were taking place in the 90s, and you read about how CODESA, the majority of the delegates at one stage wanted some kind of federalism. And basically the ANC managed to get everything they wanted, which was a big state with a big government and proportional representation and very little autonomy given to communities, the kind that Buthelezi wanted or the National Party was looking for. And that kind of brute force in bringing that about, it actually undermines this whole idea of a rainbow nation. Because I actually, for a long time, I thought that was a kind of a positive symbol, because in a rainbow nation, you have distinct colors and they can coexist. But what we've seen in South Africa is, first of all, the official languages they're not even supported. You know, you try and set up anything kind of based in one of the minority languages, and you get huge flack for it. And there's just really been, you know, in the rhetoric towards white people in South Africa, it's just become more and more venomous. And what's amazing is that so many white liberals just are ready to take it. There's like a masochism to white liberalism, where, you know, you can have this president who in the midst of a pandemic says, no, he's only going to help out. He's not going to help out white people. That's just not going to happen. And it's like, yeah, Cyril, he's our leader. It's insane.
You know, not our leader, he's our father.
He's our father. He has family meetings.
Yeah.
And you know, there's just there's no real love. It goes back to like what I was saying. There's no sense of having a home, of having a community, of having a people. And what should have been done is this idea of nations in one country. I think that's the way South Africa has to go. It has to be a sense of that we can't work, we can't function together. We can maybe share a currency, share some borders. I'm not sure how it could all work out, but the idea of a united South Africa, if the leadership is basically committing hate speech against parts of the population, then obviously it cannot exist, and that's where we are in South Africa.
Now, something we've seen in the wake of the Afghanistan disaster, in the wake of that withdrawal, is a lot of classical liberals, not even just liberals, saying that no, imperialism just wasn't done right. Nation building just wasn't done right. We needed more imperialism. We needed a stronger hand. What we saw in Afghanistan cannot be put at the feet of liberalism. It's not our fault. What's your reaction to that type of cope or that defensiveness?
You know, sometimes you just need to realize you got lost. I mean, you lost. You got stuffed up. The Taliban beat you, America. It beat you, NATO. You lost. It's, you know, it doesn't matter if you say we could have done this, we could have done that. You lost. And the Taliban was stronger than America, because unless America wanted to make it like the 51st state, you know, which is a nation building, that's just you know, conquest, this idea that no, they're going to hand over to some kind of legitimate Afghanistani government, they couldn't do it. They didn't do it, so it failed. So it doesn't work. And I mean, it's not like Afghanistan, it hasn't been tried before. You know, the British failed there, the Russians failed there. They tried to bring in communism. America tried to bring in democracy, and it just doesn't work like that in the world. And you can see why then. You know, Russia is so hated by the United States. When you know, I think if you look at the Russian defense budget, I don't know if it's in the top 10. It's like below Japan and kind of really kind of tame countries. And Russia's the big enemy, just because they also don't fit into kind of this blank slate liberalism. And you see, what's even interesting happening is China. China seems to be now saying, well, you know, there was a belief, end of the 90s, communism has fallen, end of history, liberal democracy will triumph. Let's do lots of trade deals with China. We'll open up their markets and then democracy will follow. And China just said, no, we're not going to do that. Sorry, we're not interested in democracy. And I mean, now they're doing some really interesting things like banning video games, making sure that celebrities depict traditional values. Now, I'm no fan of the Communist Party of China, but to kind of maintain this view that the liberal West is some kind of moral superiority, I don't think that applies anymore. You saw this kind of hysteria about abortion in the United States, where they just want to restrict it. They didn't even want to ban it in Texas, and suddenly that is just like mania. How dare you do that? You know, it's the same thing with the vaccinations. It's the same thing with LGBTQ. Liberalism is not live and let live. it is something really quite dark and ugly. And we're seeing that now with the vaccine mandates. So there's not this idea that there's this march of progress. You get on the right side of history. That's just not true, and it's a myth. They've kind of we've been telling ourselves in the West since the Enlightenment, basically.
And you mentioned in your piece as well, you wrote a piece that I linked in the description for people that are interested. I'm just going to read the title here to prickle some curiosities. So Chris wrote a piece earlier this year titled "A New Era of Anarcho-Tyranny for South Africa and the Global Liberal Empire." Now, I want to focus on that last bit before we go to Anarcho-Tyranny in South Africa. And this is also something that I've seen a lot of liberals push back against. They say, no, we're not imperialistic. We're just doing the right thing. Would you really allow other countries, if they're doing something morally reprehensible, why would you just sit idly and not do something? But the question is not about stopping something you find morally reprehensible. It's actually, the question is, what does it take to do that? And that's the big thing. That's the uncomfortable question, because in the end, the only way you're going to be able to change a country morally is if you take it over, you take it over, and then you turn it into your own little colony, and then you enforce your morality there. Now, that question of imperialism and liberalism, what are your thoughts there on why liberalism necessitates imperialism? Why is there that relationship between that liberal universalism and imperialism?
A tough question, and I think you've got to start by just looking at the realities on the ground. In that, in many countries has just been absolutely terrible. It's just so obvious that when America gets involved in a country, they're going to stuff it up. You can kind of look at the world through this idealism and this abstract morality, but the question is, well, what do liberal countries, how do they liberate places around the world? When Britain basically handed Zimbabwe over to Mugabe to liberate it, I mean, did that improve anybody's lives in Zimbabwe? No. What's the unemployment rate there? What's the ethnic cleansing that Mugabe undertook in Zimbabwe? I think it was about 3 times higher than all the political deaths in the whole history of apartheid. And so you see around the world that, is there an example of radical Islam around the world that hasn't been at one stage supported or inflamed by the United States? I'm not sure that you can find it. It's you go back to Al Qaeda, you go back to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, ISIS. At one stage, America and Syria was funding. I think the Pentagon was funding ISIS, and somebody else the CIA was arming the people they were fighting. They had weapons of war shooting at each other with both. They funded Saddam Hussein before they decided to topple him. Libya.
You see cases of FBI backed forces fighting CIA backed forces.
Yeah. And then look at Libya. After Iraq, Muammar Gaddafi came forward and said, look, I don't want to be invaded like Saddam Hussein. I'm going to show you all my weapons, and I'm going to end the weapons program. He'd even made a deal with Berlusconi in Italy to limit immigration, it wasn't refugees, it was economic immigrants. And then Obama and what is his name? Hollande, or I think it was Hollande in France, and David Cameron decide, no, Arab Spring. Let's blow him up. Hillary Clinton arrives after Gaddafi has been sodomized with a bayonet to death and celebrates his death. And now Libya is literally just a slave nation. It's an absolute mess. And of course, Obama sending forces in there without congressional approval. Some idea that they were doing it for good, for rights. It's just not true. And you can even go back to World War II. There's one of the greatest diplomats of all time, George Kennan, who actually moved the wheels of the American government against Stalin. After, suddenly they realized that Roosevelt and his kind of colleagues in his government were basically almost communists. And Kennan alerted everybody. When he traveled to Hamburg and Dresden after World War II and saw the destruction, he said nothing can justify that firebombing that the Allied forces did on civilian cities. Obviously, the Axis powers were vicious and terrible as well. But, America drops a nuclear bomb on kids in Japan, and it's the good war. It's, the world is a vicious and violent place. And liberalism is, I think it has the particular disadvantage of having this kind of veneer of moral purity, which makes it even more dangerous, because you can do these things whilst justifying them for the sake of human rights, when you're just making everybody's lives worse. I mean, what was accomplished in Afghanistan? As Biden left, they had that suicide bomber kill a few Marines. And what did he do? He went and drone bombed a family. There was like 7 children he killed in Afghanistan as they were leaving. And then he kind of touts it in the press, and Biden, bringing the nice guy. It's not the horrible, mean Trump. He just butchered a whole lot of kids, and the media didn't even care. So it hasn't been a force for good around the world. It's just not true. And the Eastern European communism put in place by liberalism, and South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC regime. People don't realize, they think you're not allowed to say it, but you'll have Bill Gates pouring money into it. Bill Gates was apparently at the African Union meeting recently. You have George Soros funding the Daily Maverick. A lot of the health faculties in South Africa funded by the Gates Foundation. And these tentacles spread out all over the world, and they're actually suffocating the human spirit. And I'm getting quite passionate and intense, but I'm angry, because you get these nice Christians and nice liberal people who think they're part of doing good, take your vaccine, Black Lives Matter, and they don't realize that we are in this massive shift in the world where literally evil is. Has no one read have you read that part in the book of Revelation? This is it. They're not going to stop at COVID. Liberalism is not live and let live. It is big government. It's liberate you from everything that's naturally human, like normal family life, normal marriage, local communities, ethnic identity. And what could happen now is there might be some failing Austrian artist somewhere getting ready to lead a massive reaction, which is the last thing anybody wants. But if you keep, you saw Weimar democracy when they tried to force liberalism on Germany in the 1920s. All it required was a big stock market crash, and suddenly all that resentment could be harnessed by this Asperger's artist maniac called Adolf Hitler. And who's to say that we don't have a big economic collapse next week? I mean, the whole thing is built on massive debt and money. So liberalism needs to look at itself now. I mean, if you had to say 2 years ago to your nice liberal friends that the nice liberal nanny state was going to make you wear stuff over your face and start injecting 6-month-old babies with an experimental vaccine, which they're doing in South Africa, starting soon, I mean, everyone would be horrified. But it happens gradually. You get the media narrative, and all of a sudden, if you question puberty blockers for little kids, if you question kids wearing masks and socially distancing from each other, mandatory vaccines, you're a fascist. And we are due for an absolute revolutionary time of upheaval in the world that hasn't been seen for centuries.
Now, seeing as we're venturing into the field of morality, and maybe just to end off this topic, when it comes to other countries doing things that we as Christians view as morally reprehensible, or things that you view as morally reprehensible or evil, what is the answer then, if not going in there and enforcing your morality? What is the right way to treat this type of moral clash?
It's a difficult question, but it goes back to realism. You know, the Catholic Church has the just war theory. When are you justified to take up arms? And there has to be a legitimate authority that makes the decision. There has to be a sense of defense. There has to be some norm of success. You can't just go and do it if you don't think you're going to be successful. And I think, first of all, the Western nations need to ask themselves if what they are spreading, if what they're keen to impose on other people really is that good. And that's one of the main issues, because at the heart of the West is this idea that there are no real moral norms, that there's this massive hypocrisy that humans create values and morality, but then we want to impose them on other people. And to go back to a sense of injustice, if you look at Afghanistan, why did they go in there? The Taliban didn't do 9/11. That's never been shown. We've got the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and I still tell people, in the official 9/11 report, I don't believe in holograms and kind of all that stuff that, I think that's there to make you think any questioning of it is ridiculous. But the way they identified one of the hijackers was they found his passport on the streets of Manhattan after that plane went into the building. And that is in the official explanation. I mean, give me an absolute break. And so they decide, no, we got to go in Afghanistan. It was definitely bin Laden. And the Taliban actually said, well, give us the evidence, we'll hand him over. But because of our beliefs as Muslims, we have a strong belief in hospitality and not handing our guests over. Apparently, they even were trying to get rid of them earlier. But because of a deep-seated belief in not just handing people over to a foreign power who demands them, I think at one stage they said, we'll hand them over to some kind of Islamic court that we can convene in the area. And Bush just said, oh, no, we're not interested in that. So there wasn't even a just cause for them to go into. I think a lot of the right to intervene, I think a lot of it comes back to Rwanda, in which they didn't do anything. And there was this saying, never again. Now, I don't know much about the history of Rwanda and so forth, but that is just one incident doesn't establish like this precedent for all time. You do business with China, this West does business with all sorts of rotten people like Saudi Arabia. It's a veneer of morality when they choose to go into Afghanistan. And a lot of the time it's not based on any kind of truth. I mean, the Taliban leader apparently after the invasion kind of lived down the road from an American base, like unmolested. There's so many things that are just not the case that the media tells us. And that's, something like Curtis Yarvin. He was on the Tucker Carlson show, the neo-reactionary, the monarchist of the United States. Mencius Moldbug was his pseudonym. He coined the phrase the cathedral. And the cathedral is the ruling regime. Democracy doesn't really happen. You have an oligarchy in places like the United States, and it's ruled by this nexus of media, university, and congressional aides. They run the American government. And like he was saying, you thought Trump could change the government. Trump controls 0.01% of the government. He doesn't occupy the same position as Franklin Roosevelt. And so you have this complete, total machine of government and society which frames the moral debate for you. And what we need to do is get outside of that frame and see it for what it is. That America is saying they're going to help the young woman by doing gender studies in America. That's not some kind of...
oh, wait, I see Chris is back.
Sorry.
Hey, Chris, I see you're back.
But my technology is failing a little bit, so... hopefully I can last a little bit longer.
No, that's no problem. I was just answering a question here in the chat. So yeah, Chris, maybe something that I also wanted to talk to you about is you were talking now about the cathedral, but there's another term that's becoming more popular that I think needs some explanation, and that's the term Anarcho-Tyranny. You use it in the title of your opinion piece. What does Anarcho-Tyranny mean, and why is it relevant to specifically South Africa and the world at large?
So it's a paradox that you live in a society such as South Africa. You basically live in anarchy, but then you still have heavy government control. And so it's a liberalism, and you see it in the United States as well, where there's some rules are enforced and some are not. And there's a choice of which things to clamp down on and where to allow chaos just to emerge. And I mean, it's particularly true in South Africa and the United States, where if you say a bad word, you can be destroyed forever. If you commit a gruesome murder, people might never know your name. But if you say a bad word, your name will be tarnished forever. And I mean, you see it again. The exemplar is the vaccines, where you can be a pedophile and you can freely walk around. You can go anywhere. But soon you will find that if you're not vaccinated, even if you've had the virus, even if you're young and you're at no risk, and even though the vaccine doesn't prevent transmission, which I don't, apparently that's just something to ignore, you will soon be restricted from many things, certain jobs, certain areas. That is the essence of anarcho-tyranny. What crimes are given media attention? So that is, you have to, you can't smoke in certain places. You must wear a mask, but serious crime runs rampant. I drove through across South Africa during the riots. I dodged the riots a little bit, but I mean, you go to parts of South Africa, I was just stunned at how filthy so many of the cities are and the small towns are. I mean, they are. I said to my wife, "There's no ways that South Africa can solve its major problems when people are living like this, when you can't collect the rubbish and you're trying to then take over national healthcare. That how can people, if they don't feel at home where they live, if there's a sense of we can just live in a trash heap, how do you even hope to solve anything else? But never mind the trash, never mind the money stolen, never mind a failing education system. Let's back Cyril when he locks down our entire country and sends us to the highest unemployment rates in the world. And that's anarcho-tyranny in the liberal world.
Now, Chris, I was also asked before the stream, someone sent in a question. They asked, what are your thoughts on nation-building projects that, like South Korea and Japan, that the West and Western liberals would claim are major successes of nation-building? What are your thoughts on those countries like that, for example?
Well, South Korea is about to go out of existence. They have a fertility rate of like less than 1. It is. You look at K-pop. I don't know if you've seen the phenomenon of K-pop. China's just banned it. It's not a healthy culture. So they were able to achieve material wealth, but that's not necessarily the definition of something good. Sure, they're not North Korea. North Korea was richer until the 70s, if you look back. I mean, North Korea is psychotic. But South Korea, if people aren't having any children, what does that tell you? Is that healthy? Japan is similar. I'm sure it's nice and clean. They're not entirely liberal because they don't let foreigners live there. It's incredibly difficult to move there. Nobody tells them they are terribly racist and xenophobic like Donald Trump, who wanted to put like a point system like Australia into America and not just have an open border. But so you could almost argue that where they are successful, it's not really liberal. There's something in the Asian culture, something in the Asian genetics even that make them susceptible to developing quickly. But I wouldn't look at South Korea as a successful nation at all. It's wealthy, but I think if people don't want to have children in your country, I think that's really telling. And I think I think their fertility rates are incredibly low as well. But again, a lot of Japanese culture is very traditional, and it's not liberal at all. So that would be my answer there. It's also incredible if you think about Japan. They had a nuke dropped on them by America. Then America occupied them, and they decided, well, we're going to come together and we're going to get on with it. That we're just not getting that in other countries where resentment is becoming kind of resentment rather than a healthy country, rather than a healthy society, is now the governing passion. And I think that's also where democracy gets you. You could look at Singapore, for example. That's not liberal at all, and they've probably achieved more. What about Israel? Israel is an ethno-state. They're the only ones allowed to be an ethno-state in the entire world, apparently. But they are almost as young a population as South Africa, because it's not, no one would suggest they have labor governments every now and then and so forth, but in terms of how they kind of define themselves as a nation, it's not liberal at all. And their birth rate is higher than, I think, Hungary, which has been pouring money into trying to increase fertility. And China's got the same problem as well now, where they are massive decline in fertility. So you can look at those basics, which I think a lot of common sense thinkers would in history, and say, well, if your nation is dying, you're obviously not successful. You can have all the cars and all the money you need in the world, but if people don't feel like they've got enough stake to kind of put their own offspring into the future of the country, then you're not really a nation. You've given up on the human adventure and the human experiment.
And I mean, this is the philosophy of the GDP graph go up. That means things are going well. But you see a lot of other problems coming to the fore. Now that you mentioned the human adventure, can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by that type of outlook on life and humanity and existence?
Well, I think in days gone by, not that I'm a huge fan of his, but Rod Dreher has written a bit about this, where people understood their lives as rivers. They were heading somewhere. There was a pilgrimage. You build a cathedral that you wouldn't see. You understood yourself as inheriting something and passing it on. And we have, in an age of narcissism, lost that sense that we haven't come to terms with our mortality. We don't really feel a part of a river. We are tourists. We go from attraction to attraction. We go from pool to pool. We don't want to be pinned down. And there's something really dehumanizing about that. And this comes back to kind of a good argument against liberalism. Where is the great art of our great liberal era? Where are the Shakespeares? Where are the Michelangelos? Where is the great music? Where is the high aesthetics? It seems like that doesn't arrive with liberalism. There's
an anti-aesthetic reigning currently in the Western world.
Yeah. I mean, I just spent time in Switzerland, and you have the Swiss-French architect Le Corbusier, who described, a house as a machine. It's just a machine for you to live in, and fundamentally, it's like giving up on time almost. There's no past, there's no future, and we see it in COVID as well, and in particularly my fellow Christians, because there's nothing Christian about preserving life at all costs. That's not a Christian idea, that you're going to cover up your children's faces so that like a person may not die. There's meant to be a sense of death. Where is your sting? And that's completely gone. And what's interesting, we have like a weaponized empathy. I think I might have used that talking to Roman. And it's like a Christian heresy. Liberalism is almost a Christian heresy, which makes it particularly susceptible for Christians to kind of really buy into it and support it. That, freedom, that's what Christians are about. And it is what Christians are about. Christ sets us free. But we are not free. The important thing is we're not free from everything to be pure autonomous consumers. We're free for something. We're free to kind of really make the most of our existence, our being. And we're seeing the absolute opposite here. We're seeing we'll reduce life to yeast-like conditions where you will survive, but nothing great will ever be achieved again. We will just Netflix and chill and watch porn on the internet. I mean, when Trump was elected, some of the liberals in America complained, "Oh no, he's going to be like Putin," and Putin just banned porn in America, in Russia. You know, he doesn't want, you know, sexual ideas pushed on kids, and yeah, that's liberalism. You know, that famous conservative writer David French in America, who's huge anti-Trump. He described drag queen hour in public libraries where school children are forced to attend as a great blessing of democracy. And liberalism is not live and let live. They're coming for your kids, and they're saying it, and they're doing it, and we're not really doing much about it. And at some point, we're going to reach a civilizational breaking point, a real crack and fissure in history, because you can only push back against human nature and reality for so long until it bites back at you.
Now, before we get to what can be done about it, I think there's a topic that's, or not a topic, but more of an idea that we are seeing increasingly now in the wake of Afghanistan, but something that's been coming for a long time. And that is not only the idea that America is an empire, but that it's an empire in decline, or an empire where the sun is setting on it. What are your thoughts on what the future holds for one of the great major hegemons in the world today?
Yeah, look, something's going wrong. It's my phone's telling me, telling me things. So if I die, I might need to. You might need to do that. What is to be done on your own, or I might pop towards the end of it. But when it comes to America, I mean, yeah, a nation that does, you know, all civilizations they're not killed, they commit suicide. And if you go back to kind of Spengler and who was the other famous historian, you know, where they'd see that great cultures and civilizations are a response to a problem, but then you get this kind of calcification and this which sets in, and a kind of nihilism sets in. You know, you know, consumerism in America, and it comes back to you. And I think I said this before as well. Culture is always deeply connected to your religious beliefs, what you truly believe about the universe and your place in it. And what the West has been doing is it's just running on fumes of Christianity. It doesn't believe Christianity, but it has, you know, kind of ideas of justice and beauty and liberty that are just kind of fading away, which they've borrowed from Christianity. Human rights is one of them. And you know, eventually when you're aborting 1 million babies a year in America, you're exposing kids to LGBT, and you're giving kids puberty blockers, and you're still pretending you're a normal society. I think China's going to bury you. China's going to bury you. And it's amazing to me, you know, I spoke to some Chinese people, and they tell me that in China, they don't feel under pressure to wear a mask. They don't feel under pressure to get vaccinated. Now, I don't know if that's just where they live, but, you know, we've seen the images of pool parties in Wuhan. We've seen they believe in themselves. They want to achieve something. I had a Chinese student in my teaching who started questioning, like, identity politics. Said, well, I just want to read the best authors. Well, who's to say I can be, you know, that a female author speaks more to me just because I'm a female? And I think I think America, you know, generally, like Soviet Russia, they got buried in Afghanistan and then they went into decline. And it seems like that's almost like history is rhyming for them. There's also, towards the end of the Soviet Empire, you had these old Soviet leaders, gerontocracy, and you see Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden. They are old. They are in there pushing 80. They're stuck. They're corrupt. They've become enormously wealthy from their political positions. And so there's no real energy to it anymore. And they're obsessing over their sense of national guilt. You know, slavery, the original sin of America, when it's the original sin of the entire world. You know, somebody read somewhere there's 750,000 slaves in Africa right now. And and America kind of was ripping itself into pieces because of its history. And it comes back to, you can look at Nietzsche. You get to a stage where you have the last men, the herd, the people who just want to be comfortable and happy. They don't want to achieve anything. They don't believe in anything, and their only comfort is in being exactly like their neighbor, exactly like the people all around them, and not questioning anything. So it's impossible to see how America doesn't go into decline. The thing that I'm not an expert on is things like the dollar being the global currency, and the fact that they just have so much military power. Those are kind of the questions in terms of the practicalities of their decline. But certainly, I think the rest of the world doesn't see them as a model or an exemplar at all anymore. And the whole sense of being, the Western allies, the kind of NATO arrangement, that's cracking up just as liberalism becomes more tyrannical. And you see that particularly in Australia, where it's disgusting. It's a tyranny. Australia is it's fascism, basically. It's biomedical fascism. And I think a lot of people need to start waking up to that, and this is where it ties into what is to be done. And I think, being from AfriForum, you'll know much more than I will about getting some practical things in place. I'm kind of a bit of a non-actor, unfortunately, in terms of taking action. But something, the storm is coming, no matter what we do. And we are going to have to make careful decisions as this kind of liberal global regime really shows its true colors. And that involves taking action on a community level, but not just a community level. You've got to be ready to take a stand on a national level. You can't hide in the hills. The world's not going to leave you alone everywhere you go. You look around Africa, the same COVID restrictions are everywhere in Africa because the NGOs are all over Africa. It's going to take courage, and it's going to take communities, but those communities are also going to have to compete on a society-wide level.
Now, Chris, that would have been an excellent way to end the chat, but there's a very good question here from the audience that I just want to get to before we say goodbye. Bloody Dash asks, question for Chris, should a nation always be growing birth rates, or what is the measure?
Well, I mean, if it's not replacing itself, it's not going to exist any longer. So then obviously the nation's not worth keeping. Obviously your nation sucks if it's not replacing itself. And I think more importantly, there's got to be this kind of sacred view of human life that, if we're not having the decision not to have children goes back to like a real pessimism about existence itself.
I don't know if that's the end of it now. Chris seems to have frozen there, but I think we've covered the important stuff. Thank you very much for everyone that tuned in. There was an unorthodox time, 10 o'clock in the morning. Let me just see if... all right. So thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you for all your questions and all your comments. I would have liked to thank Chris for being here as well with his valuable time, but I'll send him a message afterwards. If you want to read more on what Chris has to say and you like his ideas, there's a link to his Substack in the description. You can go check it out. And then also, if you're new to this channel, you can subscribe for more content like this. You can also leave a like. It helps out the show. If you're watching and it's not live, and it's no longer live, you can leave a comment in the comment section. I read them all. It's always very interesting to get your feedback. And yeah, I'll keep you guys up to date on who my next guest or what my next video is going to be. Share this with anyone that you think might find it interesting, and I'll check you on the next one. Cheers, guys. Have a good one.